Hello and welcome to Cosmos. This is a slightly tweaked series of videos where we talk about not the teams in the Diva format, but we talk about Elrig classes and tribal archetypes to try to give you an idea of how they work, what they do, what they're good at, what they're bad at, to see if those type of archetypes are worth investing in your time. We're going to start the series looking at the Cosmos archetype. So as you can see in the latest set, there have been a number of Signi, Cosmos Signi specifically, that have gotten good support. The biggest piece of support is the piece right here, Paradise Universe. It gives you the static ability for the rest of the game that all Cosmos Signi that are in your deck or trash are considered to be level 1s. And there are a lot of Signi that play off of that fact that can draw you cards or remove things or whatever, and we'll look at those here in a minute. But basically, you can construct your deck in such a way that the whole deck and the entire trash is all level 1s, and you can basically put that in the bank and just assume that for all of your Signi moving forward. It creates a pretty big value engine in terms of the things you're capable of, and we'll take a look at some of the things that the Cosmos Signi do enable once they see a lot of level 1s. Before we get into the Signi themselves, I'll talk at a high level about what the Cosmos archetype means in terms of what you can expect if you are using Cosmos. What kind of deck will you be playing? What kind of deck will you be struggling against? That kind of thing. So the strengths of Cosmos in general, number one is card draw. There are so many cards, especially in white, that we will see that can keep your hand filled. There have been several times where I'm playing this deck and I'm just discarding for turn just from the natural draw effects that all of these cards can do. It's also very good at removal. There's a lot of options across a lot of different colors that can allow you to remove Signi, basically open up all the lanes you need, and swing in for damage that way. Additionally, along with the card draw value engine, there's a decent amount of recursion in the deck. There is one card in particular that's literally built for recursion, and a few cards that do kind of go along with that help that archetype as well. Basically, because all of the Signi in the trash are level 1s, and there's a spell called Moonbites, which we will talk about in more detail later. It ensures that you are never far away from whatever Signi you need, because you can always cast it and recur literally any Signi in the deck that's not a servant. As far as weaknesses are concerned, Cosmos tends to struggle with having good, meaningful life bursts. It's kind of a weird trend that all of the big level 3 boss monsters that are Cosmos, with one exception, do not have life bursts on them at all. It's not a problem per se, but it does kind of force you into some weird deck building decisions, especially if you focus on certain colors that you may be using suboptimal Signi in the deck just to make sure that you have the full 20 life bursts in it. For example, if you're running just like a black, white, red Cosmos deck and you just use the best cards of those colors, you can find yourself in a situation where you're only running 8 to 12 life bursts because all of the really powerful cards just don't have life bursts on them. So it's weird deck building restrictions for that. You can get around it, but you have to kind of be careful. There are situations where you may have to use suboptimal cards, use weird ratios of like 3 ofs, 2 ofs, just to make sure you have all your life bursts and so forth. Additionally, Cosmos tends to have problems with defense. There are a couple of cards that are good at controlling that we'll talk about, but for the most part, it doesn't really protect itself too well, especially when you compare to things like Exia or Arkwin or that kind of thing. It has some trouble actually keeping its Signi around, so it does tend to kind of fold to really heavy aggression that it just can't really keep the lanes filled. You kind of rely on your Elrig deck at that point to hope that you can weather the storm, so to speak. It also struggles with resource denial, not so much on itself because it can generate a ton of card advantage, but specifically for your opponent. A lot of the removal effects, especially the really good ones, just go to enter. So basically what you're doing is you're removing the Signi in the more conventional way, but what that does is it really opens your opponent up to potentially have a huge swingy turn on their next turn because you've generated so much enter for them in the meantime. For the colors of Cosmos, I would say it's pretty non-negotiable that you're in black and white for sure. The third color is a little bit of a toss-up. I would say you could either make an argument for blue or red. Personally, I would say that red is stronger for reasons which we will get to in the future, but there are some options for a black, white, blue Cosmos deck as well. There are some Cosmos Signi in green if you want to do a Cosmos green deck, and in fact there is a dual color red-green Signi that's coming out in the next set, but I wouldn't say it's enough to actually be relevant. I would say definitely black and white, and then either your preference of blue or red. We're actually going to start talking about the Signi in black. Black for Cosmos is a very powerful removal color. You'll find a lot of really good options for that in here, plus some value options as well. So let's just start right off the bat. I'm going to mention Timer Bomb here. There's nothing too special about Timer Bomb. You can pay 2 to return a Cosmos Signi from your trash to your hand when it enters, which is pretty good. The most important thing, honestly, on the card is the life burst. Really, the fact that I'm mentioning it here is, again, because of the problem that Cosmos has in finding relevant life bursts. It's a usable body that has an enter effect that you may sometimes occasionally trigger, again, to fill your hand if you need it, but usually that's not a huge problem unless there's something specific you want. But it does have a pretty good life burst on it, which is really the most important part of the card, to be perfectly honest. The other card here, this is Microscopium. This will come out in Welcome Back Diva P06. Basically, when it enters, you mill the top card of your deck. If it is a level 1 Signi, which by the deck construction it should be, because hypothetically all the cards in your deck are level 1 Signi, then you can pay 1 colorless to vanish a Signi with power 5,000 or less. Actually, sorry, it is minus 5,000 power, which is basically, you can kind of think of it as the equivalent of a Lancelot. So everyone knows how good Lancelot is. This is the Cosmos answer to Lancelot. It's in black. It does mill you a card, which is sometimes good, sometimes bad. Usually in Cosmos it is good, for a reason we will see in a moment, plus all the recursion options as well. So it's a pretty good card. I mean, it's going to be really good answers for some of the problems that Cosmos has in general, which is basically putting pressure on your opponent prior to turn 3. A lot of the really good removal options are level 3 Signi, but this is one that will be a level 2 Signi that will give you the option to do that as well. And it's just a nice option to have. For the black level 3s, I'm going to talk about Telescopium first, which is obviously the quote-unquote grown-up answer to Microscopium. It has an enter effect to pay 1 if there are 5 or more level 1 Signi in your trash, which is probably always going to happen, because again, all of the cards in your trash are level 1 Signi. You can give a target Signi minus 5k until end of turn. If there are 10 or more, you can give it 10k instead. This, for the most part, I would say is a weaker version of Eclipse, which you can see right next to it, which we'll talk about in a moment. The only reason I mention it is because when you play Eclipse, you are forced to mill your own deck, and you could potentially refresh yourself, deck yourself out by doing that. So this is a more safe option to do that if the game goes longer. There are a lot of builds that I've been doing lately that just don't run Telescopium in favor of Eclipse. Just the Eclipse is so much better. Plus, there are a lot of other red Signi that kind of do removal better than Telescopium, but it is an option that's worth knowing about. Eclipse is one of the big main boss monsters of the deck. It has an enter effect to put the top 3 cards of your deck in your trash. If all the cards are level 1 Signi, which again, they should be by deck construction, you can pay a colorless to give a target Signi minus 10,000 power until end of turn. This is going to vanish most things on the board for you. And if it doesn't, again, we'll have a little bit of an out for that. But basically, you use Eclipse to bust open lanes. It's really good at basically paying 1 to vanish just about anything. I mean, there's some stronger level 3s that obviously will survive it, but paying 1 enter for removal is very efficient, and it's kind of one of the hallmarks of Cosmos you'll see a lot, is that you're paying 1 enter to do things that cost most other builds 2 enter, or maybe other restrictions as well, but you get around that by having the deck restrictions of the cards that you are required to use basically to make it work. She also has an auto effect, which is surprisingly relevant at times. When this card is put into your trash from the deck directly, you can pay colorless to add a target level 1 Signi without a guard from your trash to your hand. This on surface level doesn't look terribly useful or strong, but remember, with Paradise Universe, all the cards in your trash are level 1 Signi. So basically, if you have Paradise Universe activated, if Eclipse gets milled by any reasons, for, you know, maybe if you played a Microscopium, if you used Eclipse itself, you can mill Eclipse from Eclipse, and then when that happens, you can pay and enter and return any Signi in your trash to your hand. So it provides a way for milling your own deck to actually potentially provide you with card advantage, which can be relevant because you can, again, if card selection, recursion, there's a lot of things in the trash you may be needing. If you need another Eclipse to vanish another lane, if you need something, just literally anything to fill a spot, I mean, that's an option as well. So it's a good card. It's a weirdly useful effect, and it kind of comes up in ways, in times you don't expect it. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on as well, because it's a trigger that I think you can miss if you're not being terribly careful about it. The third option in black, which is another really important archetype defining card, is Moonbites. It's a spell, which is weird for a deck that looks at level 1 Signy. For 1 black, you can add a target Cosmos Signi from your trash to your hand. So again, this is the recursion. Basically, you pay and enter, and Moonbites is any other card in the deck, which is really nice to have. If the Signy you chose specifically is Eclipse, you can give a target Signy on your opponent's field minus 2,000 power. So with Eclipse and with Moonbites, that combo, both of those work together to basically provide the minus 12k that you would need for more traditional removal options for level 3s. Most of level 3s, you want to hit the 12k threshold. Well, when Eclipse can't do that on her own, you can leverage Moonbites to give you over that hump essentially as well. It also has a constant effect that as long as this card is in your deck or trash, if one of your effects refers to it, you treat it as a level 1 Signy. So it actually gets around the restriction of being a spell because it has its own ability that it considers itself a level 1 Signy in the deck and the trash. And that basically gets you the full slate of having level 1 Signy and also having spell options as well. Additionally, if you look, this is something I hadn't noticed before, but if you look at Moonbites and Eclipse, the art kind of like goes into itself. I mean, it kind of extends the art on it, which is a really nice, neat touch as well. So obviously those two cards are designed to be played together. They're both very good. Eclipse is incredible at opening up lanes. Moonbites, like I said, gives you literally any Signy that you need at any given time, just because the whole deck is Cosmos. It also can provide incidental removal as well. It's the kind of thing that it can act as both a removal spell for small Signy. You know, if there's a 2k you need to get rid of, you just pay 1, get Eclipse back. So it's like, it's a neutral card advantage. You don't even lose a card. All you're doing is paying an enter to just remove a 2,000 or less from the battlefield, which is great as well. It also has a life burst, which is again relevant for the deck, which struggles with life burst. To vanish target level 2 or less Signy on your opponent's field. You'll pretty much always have a target for this, which is great. It may not always protect you from damage, but at least you'll always be able to open up a lane, which is something that is always welcome. So with especially Eclipse and Moonbites specifically, those are two of the backbone cards of the archetype. I wouldn't run a deck that doesn't run 4 Moonbites. I probably would run, I don't think I'd run fewer than 3 Eclipses as well. Those two cards in particular combo really well together, and they really kind of get your engine going and make sure that you always have lanes that you're able to swing through really easily. So after seeing the power of black Cosmos removal options, we're going to move on to white, which is more of the hand card advantage archetype, which you will obviously be able to see here in a minute. Alphard is low-key one of the most powerful cards in the deck, which is weird for a level 1 Signy, just 1,000 power and no life burst. Whenever it attacks, you reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a level 1 Signy, you draw a card. The short version of this card is basically when it attacks, reveal the top card of your deck and draw it. Because again, all of the cards in your deck hopefully will be considered level 1 Signy, so you just get that for free. It is crazy how much advantage this card can give you. It replaces itself automatically. It can potentially dig you into servants if you need them, type of thing. With Alphard in play, you're always going to have your hand full. It can potentially cause your opponent to rethink their removal options, that maybe they remove the Alphard because they don't want you to draw a card as opposed to something bigger that you may have, you know, in an open lane attacking them, type of thing. So it causes some interesting choices. Alphard is extremely strong for a level 1, and I would always run probably 4 copies of it in any Cosmos deck. The other one I want to mention is Typo. Again, the main reason I'm mentioning it is because it has a somewhat decent life burst. It's not the best life burst in the world, but it has a life burst on it that's usable. It has a constant effect, which is pretty good. As long as there's a level 1 Signy in your enter zone, it gets plus 4,000 power. Now, relevant here that Paradise Universe does not affect the enter zone. So you actually do have to do it the old-fashioned way and make sure that there is a level 1 in the enter zone. Now, thankfully, you have options for, you know, what you're paying for. You know that, you know, you have a typo in the deck that actually is relevant at times. So there is some counterplay around that, but there are times when this, ideally you'd want this to always be a 7k level 1, which again, having a 7k level 1 is awesome if you can have that for free. But this one's a little bit trickier and clunkier to use in that sense. So you have to keep that in mind as you go, that your enter zone is not affected by Paradise Universe, which is something that it's not inherent. As you start playing the deck, you kind of just assume that everything's a level 1 everywhere, but it's not. In your hand and in your enter zone, there's still whatever, and of course the field, whatever the actual levels are. So you do have to be wary of that. Also, we have Sash here, which is coming out in P06 as well. Welcome back, Diva. Sash was kind of the OG Cosmos back in, before Diva format. Sash was basically Cosmos Tribal for an Elrig. Her enter effect is to discard a Cosmos Signi, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, reveal a Cosmos Signi from among them and add it to your hand, and then you put the rest on the bottom. What this basically does is you can turn any Cosmos Signi in your hand to potentially the best one on the top 5 of the deck. It adds to consistency, card selection as well. You know, even though that Cosmos has a pretty good time at generating card advantage and having a lot of cards in hand, sometimes you still can't find what you need, but she can basically allow you to discard a card to find, you know, potentially a better option out of your top 5. Also worth noting as well that, you know, now that we've seen Eclipse, you can potentially discard an Eclipse to a Sash, and that will turn on Moonbites, that you can turn Moonbites now into a -2k removal spell just by discarding the Eclipse to a Sash. And again, you can just recur Eclipse back with the Moonbites, and there's a lot of interplay between all this stuff going on. So really good card. Again, you see it doesn't have a life burst, unfortunately, which is kind of a common trend, but this is a card I definitely splash in as well. It doesn't provide you raw card advantage, but it provides you card selection, which in some cases is more important than just having the cards in hand, is having the right cards. For white level 2s, we're going to start with Lynx, which is one of the newer options. Again, Lynx is just a vanilla 10k, and it's got a really good life burst, which in the deck is a huge asset. You can pay a colorless. If you do, return target Signi on your opponent's field to their hand. That's really good at opening lanes. It actually does provide some amount of resource denial as well, which I mentioned that the deck struggles with. The ability to bounce Signi as opposed to vanish them is really nice. The fact that it doesn't have level or power restrictions. It's just you got to pay the 1, and then you can just get rid of anything. It's really good. It's good for a defensive option if you hit it early. If you hit it late, you can just hit whatever the strongest, scariest thing on the opponent's board is and just get it out of the way. It's a really powerful life burst. Even though it's a vanilla 10k, it's something that I think the deck really needs, just because, as I've mentioned several times, it really struggles with finding good, relevant life bursts. Even though the card is just a vanilla, it's the kind of card that, again, you can discard it to Sash, you can do all kinds of, you can cycle it away, all kinds of other stuff, basically enter charge it, ignore it if it's in your hand, but if it's in the life burst, it becomes extremely relevant. The other level 2 I want to mention here is Cercinus, which, similar to Alphard, is a very powerful card. Pay 1 white, look at the top 5 cards of the deck, reveal a level 1 Signi, and add it to your hand, and put the rest on the bottom. Not only is this card advantage, it is selective card advantage, the best card out of your top 5. You can actually pull Servants from this if you want, which is extremely relevant. You can pull whatever bodies you need to put on the board from that. You can use it to refill your hand if you're against a discard heavy deck. You can play a Cercinus, which will give you an extra card in hand. It is a very powerful card. One of the reasons why the deck just kind of hums, because again, every card in the deck is a level 1 Signi, so you have your choice of whatever of the top 5 cards of your deck that you want, and just go from there. So this is another extremely useful card for basically all purposes that you would need it for. Finally, we'll talk about some of the powerful level 3 Signi that are Cosmos in white. Cassiopeia is probably the best one right now. It has an auto effect. Whenever it attacks, you reveal the top 4 cards of your deck. If there are 3 or more level 1 Signi among them until the end of your opponent's end phase, the Signi gets plus 3,000 and Shadow Signi. And then you put them on the bottom in any order. And then she has another effect at the beginning of your main phase. You can pay a white and 1 to return target Signi on your opponent's field to their owner's hand. So you attack with Cassiopeia. You reveal the top 4, which again, based on how your deck is constructed, they'll all be level 1s. So she'll become a 15,000 with Shadow Signi until the end of your opponent's next turn. And then when you start the following turn, you can pay 2 enter to bounce anything back to their hand to open a lane, and again, enter deny them as well. This is a really powerful defensive card. It's very good. I mean, Shadow Signi is really useful. 15k is a really high threshold. Basically, if the attack trigger hits, you can pretty much always assume that this is going to stay on your field until the following turn. Really, the problem with it is that it's a big if. This is the kind of card that your opponent will see on the field, and they will use all of their removal options in the Elric deck to get rid of it. And it's really a removal target. And unfortunately for the deck, Cosmos especially, there's not a whole lot of other really good targets for it. A lot of effects that they have happen either on enter, or there's some attack triggered removal as well that we'll see that's in red. But there's not a lot of Signi that are like really scary, that again, like Arcwin, Exia, Kome, when your opponent sees them, they're like, I need to get rid of these cards immediately. And when they see Cassiopeia on the field, that's the kind of card that triggers it. So really, in order to have it be super useful, you kind of need 2 of them at once, or you need, you know, several of them over several turns, which you can do with Moonbites and stuff like that, but it's kind of hard to justify putting the resources into it. In my experiences, a lot of times I've played the Cassiopeia and just had it removed before it was relevant, and it just hasn't really worked out in a meaningful way. That's not to say it can't work out. I think Cassiopeia is really good in defensive control style decks. If you're playing blue, especially, I would run a lot of Cassiopeias because the blue decks tend to be slower in general. If you're running red with Cosmos, I don't know how important it is, but it's mentioning just because it has a very powerful effect that if it does go off, you're all set. The hard part is actually getting it to go off. So there's a little bit of a give and take between those as well. The other card that's pictured here is Pegasus. This is a card that's coming out in P07, so not the next set at the time of recording, but the one after it. It has an auto effect at the beginning of your attack phase. If you have a level 1 Signy on your field, draw a card. It also has an auto effect that whenever the Signy attacks, if you have 10 or more level 1 Signy in your trash, you can enter charge 1. And it has an action ability to put 4 level 1 Signy from your enter zone into your trash to put target Signy on your opponent's field into its owner's trash. So there's a lot of things going on here. The first effect, if you have a level 1 Signy on your field, draw a card. Really good. As we've talked about, I mean, I talked about how good Alphard was. The fact that it happens on attack phase is a little unfortunate because you have to have, you know, full field before it triggers. You have to have a level, because again, the Paradise Universe does not apply to Signy on the field. So you have to actually have a level 1 on the field in order for it to trigger, which is relatively easy to do. It's not terribly complicated. So it will, for the most part, draw you a card, which is, again, card advantage, another one of the strengths of Cosmos. So many cards that are good do that. The other auto effect is probably the most relevant part of the card, and the reason why I wanted to highlight it, that whenever it attacks, if you have 10 or more level 1s in your trash, which you should because you're milling and all the cards in your trash are level 1 Signy, you get an enter charge 1, which is relevant. The deck, it doesn't necessarily struggle with enter so much, but having it gives you a lot more options in terms of what you can do on your turn. Obviously, because of all the cards we've talked about, the deck has no issues with card advantage at all. The one resource where it does possibly struggle is enter. You can find yourself running out. But if you have these Pegasus on the field, you can actually potentially use that as enter charge, which again, enter charging in white on a level 3 Signy is somewhat uncommon. So having that as an option is really nice. You can use that to fuel. You can basically turn your Eclipses into straight up removal spells where you have the enter to pay it. You pay the Eclipse enter effect to minus 10k. You Moonbites it back to minus 2k. You can play Eclipse again. You vanish it. You know, paying all this enter, like the enter charges for the Eclipses and the Moonbites, all that stuff, plus all your other incidental effects. If you have, you know, powerful pieces that you're going to use in the future, whatever your assists are as well, all of that enter charge adds up. So the ability to have options for the enter charge in white is kind of nice to have. So I don't know that I would run this at the full 4, just because, again, there's so many options for recursion and all that stuff. But it's just a nice option and something to keep in your mind as you're building and playing the deck. If you're like, man, it would be really nice if I had a couple, like maybe 1 or 2 more enter, then this may be a card that's worth investing in. Next up, we're going to talk briefly about blue, that if you do decide to make a blue Cosmos Signy deck, what you can potentially expect to find as far as what your options are. 4 level 1s, I do really like Hydrus. It is constant effect as long as there are 2 or more level 1 Signy in your trash. This Signy gets plus 4,000 power. A little bit harder to trigger at the beginning of the game, but later on in the game, this is always a level 1 7k, which is very relevant. It has a life burst to look at the top 3, reveal Signy, add it to your hand, or put it on the field. So it's potentially a lane-filling life burst, which can be relevant. There are some enter effects for Cosmos Signy where you can vanish things on enter, so that's relevant as well. Really, the biggest part is that it's a 7k level 1, so it dodges Lancelot a lot of times. Early game, not so much. You kind of have to be careful about what you put in the trash. Again, there are ways to get around it if you use like X-Echo or Madoka Float to fill up the trash pretty easily. But you do have to keep that in mind. I like it, again. 7k level 1s I think are great. And this one has a life burst on it, which, as we've talked about, the struggles with life bursts. And it's a decent life burst. It's not the best life burst, but it can potentially help you out in a pinch. So it's worth mentioning as an option. The middle Signy here is Delphinus, which is coming out in the next set, P06. It has an auto effect at the beginning of your attack phase. Reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a level 1 Signy, draw a card. So basically similar to Alphard, where you reveal a top card. If it's a level 1 Signy, you draw it. The difference here is this triggers at the beginning of the attack phase as opposed to when it attacks. So this will always trigger even if your opponent uses removal on it, because your attack phase triggers will happen before theirs do. So it's a little bit better than Alphard. The trade-off is that it's a level 2 and not a level 1. It's also blue, so you kind of have to be in blue for that. But again, it's more options to keep your hand refilled. If you're low on level 1s or you're low on level 2s, you need that option as well. It's another option to have as well. The level 3 that I like in blue is Orion. It has a constant effect during your opponent's turn. If a Signy would leave your opponent's field, it's put into its trash instead. And that includes from anywhere. If you're bouncing it with an Elrig assist, if they are attempting to enter charge it from the field during their enter charge phase, which is relevant. I mean, instead of enter charging it, it just goes straight to the trash. So they can basically waste their enter on that effect as well. She has an auto effect that at the end of your opponent's turn to draw a card. So again, more card advantage. And then there's an action effect to discard a level 1 Signy to freeze all Signy on your opponent's field. Again, the Paradise Universe does not check your hand. So again, worth mentioning as well. So the card you discard actually has to be a level 1 Signy in order for this to work. But the basic play line here is you play Orion, you discard a level 1 after they've attacked, or if they've been down for another reason, like, clap, etc. All their Signy get frozen. Then on their next turn, obviously, usually when your opponent has a frozen Signy, that's the first thing they enter charge is one of those. So if there are multiples of them, they're going to pick one of them to try to enter charge. But if they do try to enter charge it, Orion will send it straight to the trash. So now you've got card denial because the frozen cards will have to get trashed if they want to fill up the lanes. You do have a little bit of enter denial as well if they try to enter charge from that. It's really more of a hand denial type thing as well, because you basically think that all 3 of the frozen Signy on the board, or however many there are, all their frozen Signy are going to go to the trash. If they do choose to enter charge, they'll have to do it from the hand if they want to have any at all. Again, if they choose it from the field, it'll go to the trash because of Orion's effect. So they have to charge from the hand. So you're basically restricting yet another card from their hand, or they just may not enter charge, which is also an option as well. She also has a life burst, which again is relevant in Cosmos, to down target Signy on your opponent's field and freeze it and draw a card. So it's an okay life burst. It's not great. It's nothing to write home about, but it's usable. The effect on Orion is pretty good, but as you can see, she really wants a more slow control, resource denial type build, which the rest of the Cosmos Signy don't really go along with so well. I think there are builds you can do that are Orion, like Cassiopeia focused, that really focus on just having really basically playing the long game. I can see it if you run, you can basically run potentially both Lion Disrespect and Madoka Clap to basically give yourself 2 turns off in terms of your opponent attacking. Use those to nullify any potential damage you have. You can also use Death's Shield as an option for that as well. So there are ways to go about doing it, but it really you have to dedicate the strategy to it, I think, in order to make it really useful. And I don't know how well it works within the greater Cosmos archetype as well. It's just a potential option that you may have. The other relevant thing you get by playing blue is you get a slate of dual-colored Signy, which I know a lot of people don't talk a lot about them. I love them. I think they're great value. The fact that they can charge for either enter is, it's obviously what they're used for, but they're also big for their levels. 5K level 1, 10K level 2, they're sizable. They potentially, depending on how you have your Elrig set up, they also protect against potential enter burn. So if you have a white center Elrig, if your opponent tries to burn you, most of the burn options target colors that are not the same color as the center. So if this was a mono blue and your opponent was trying to burn your white enter, if you had a white center and your opponent's trying to burn your blue enter, for example, I guess, they couldn't do that because this is a white Signy. It can share a color with your center if your center is white, or again, if your center is blue, they're trying to burn your white enter. It potentially guards against that. Additionally, this is more of a lore description that Procyon and Sirius, I think the artwork and the name of these cards is just brilliant. Procyon, I'm assuming people aren't familiar with Procyon, is the brightest star in the constellation Canis Minor, which is the small dog. And Sirius is, of course, the brightest star in the sky, in the night sky, first of all. It's also the brightest star, again, by extension, in Canis Major, which is the big dog. So Sirius, the big dog, is level 2, and you can see the little dog ears. Procyon is the small dog. You see the little small dog ears and the small tail. There's the level 1, so it's the smaller version. The artwork on Sirius 2, I mean, she's got the mega horn. If you're not familiar, Sirius, the quote-unquote North Star, it's used very much for, not so much nowadays, but back in the day it was used for navigation purposes because it was the brightest star in the sky. You could always see it. You always use that to know where you are. So she's got kind of the megaphone to see like, hey, look at me, like use me for navigation type of thing. Obviously the flashy star effect on it as well. I just think these cards are really cool, honestly, even though they're just vanillas and they're level, there's nothing exceptional about them per se, but they are dual color options. And the lore behind them, I think, is really cool, and it's worth mentioning and shouting out. And finally, we move on to red, which I think is a little bit of the spice that helps Cosmos really kind of turn a corner here. Obviously, black and white are the big colors. I think red is a really good supplemental third color, and I would probably lean toward using red, especially if you're building Cosmos. Again, as I talked about in the blue, you can build a more control-y build, but I don't think it goes along with what the archetype does as much. But red gives it a little bit more punching power, as we see here with Karina, which is whenever this Signy attacks, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a level 1 Signy, you can pay 1 colorless. If you do, vanish target Signy with power 8,000 or less. This is Hera on steroids. Hera is a card that's used in a lot of builds as being extremely powerful, that on attack you can pay 1 and vanish 5k or less. This is Hera, but better. I mean, it's 8k. It's the higher threshold. It's basically the same effect. So you have it here, and again, the restriction is that you're playing it basically within Cosmos, that it has to be a level 1 Signy, otherwise it does nothing. But thanks to Paradise Universe, we have that option now that all the cards in the deck are level 1s, so Karina will always trigger, and you'll basically always have, that option to vanish a level power 8,000 or less on your opponent's field, whatever it is. I'm going to mention Cancer here. Cancer's a little clunky to use. It has an enter effect to discard 2 level 1 Signy to vanish target Signy on your opponent's field with power 12,000 or less. The reason I say it's clunky is because, again, Paradise Universe, I have to keep saying it because I want to kind of ingrain it, Paradise Universe does not affect the hand. So you actually do have to have 2 level 1s in your hand in order to make this work. The reason I think Cancer is still really good is because Cosmos in general, as you've seen with all the white cards and even some of the black recursion cards, Cosmos has no problem refilling their hand all the time. So you're probably going to have a couple of cards that you can feel free to pitch to Cancer in order to vanish something 12k or less. And at that point, it just becomes essentially a free 12k removal spell at that point, which is extremely powerful. The fact, again, that it doesn't cost enter is very useful. So it's not a card that I would run a lot of, but because of all the recursion options, there are a lot of ways to get Cancer back and be in a situation where, man, I have 7 cards in hand because I've been drawing so much with Alphard. I have nothing to do. I have no enter, but I have a Cancer. So you play the Cancer, you slam it down, you discard 2 of these cards you're not going to use anyway, and now you're vanishing stuff, and now you're kind of good to go. So it's, again, just great. It's kind of plays into the toolbox idea of Cosmos in general, that there's a lot of cards that can kind of do slightly different things, and you're kind of picking and choosing the ones you need at any given time, and Cancer really fulfills that niche as well. Finally, for Red Signy, of course, we have what has become sort of a notorious powerhouse in Cosmos with the newest set, Draco, Natural Planet Queen. Just came out in P05. An auto effect at the beginning of your attack phase. Reveal the top 5 cards of your deck and put them on the bottom in a random order. Then you can pay 6 colorless, but this cost is decreased by 1 for every level 1 Signy revealed this way. If you pay the cost, you can vanish target Signy on your opponent's field with power 12,000 or less. So a lot of text. If you're playing Cosmos, this is basically reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, shuffle them, put them on the bottom, pay 1, vanish 12k or less. That's sort of the short version. And for that type of effect, I mean, paying 1 to vanish 12,000 or less is so efficient. There's really nothing, as far as Signy are concerned, there's nothing that has quite that level of power associated with it. Again, it's restricted to Cosmos, obviously, because you need basically 5 level 1s in order to make it work. But if all your cards are level 1s, then it works beautifully, and you're paying 1 to just banish pretty much whatever you need. So it's just another option in the slew of removal options that Cosmos has between, Cancer and Eclipse, even Cassiopeia to an extent, Telescopium. There's so many, removal options in Cosmos that this is sort of along with them. Not only is it along with them, but in fact, it's arguably the most powerful, that you have the fewest limitations on what you can get rid of with Draco, because it's anything 12k or less, you just get rid of it. Which, again, there are Signi that go above that, but they are few and far between. You can use things like Moonbites as well to decrease that power. You can use, not even just that, you can use Microscopium, other ways to just lower the threshold. So if there is something that's like 13, as long as it doesn't have Shadow, to get it down to the 12, and then you slam a Draco down, and then you just get rid of it. Very powerful effect. It's also the fact it's an attack trigger. It's not an attack. It's not a Draco trigger attack trigger. It triggers at the beginning of the attack phase, which is relevant for the next card that we're going to talk about. So the next card it will be coming out in P07. Welcome back, Diva. Lost Orange. It is Carnival. If you are familiar with the Lost Orange anime, Carnival is one of the big bad guys of that show. She has an enter effect to pay a red and 3 coins, which is a resource that we do not have access to at the moment. Target Signi on your opponent's field becomes a Servant 0, which is a level 1 vanilla Signi with no abilities, colorless. Basically, you can pay a red and 3 coins, which again we don't have access to turn off all abilities of your opponent's Signi and make them a 10k, or sorry, a 1k. Which again you could potentially vanish with Moonbites and that sort of thing. Really, the most relevant ability on Carnival. The coins is fine. You'd have to kind of dedicate yourself to building the coin strategy, but she has an action effect that once per turn, you can pay 0 red, put all cards attached to the Signi and underneath it into the trash. Then this Signi becomes the same card as target Signi without a black box until end of turn. So that black box includes things like Rise and Harmony, basically the really strong Signi. It's a way to prevent you from just slamming down a Carnival and turning it into something that has Rise that's like not designed to be just slammed down. Or if it has Harmony, you don't want to have... The whole point of Harmony is that you're limiting how many of them can exist on the field, and you don't want Carnival to just become one of those for free. Basically, the short version is Carnival has a bunch of abilities that are kind of weird and situational. The most important one is that at any time during your turn, you can turn it into any other Signi that's on the field, yours or your opponent's. Again, when you have something like Draco, who triggers at the beginning of your attack turn, or your attack phase, you can basically have a Draco. You can have a Carnival in hand to just become whatever Signi you need. You can turn that into a Draco if you need more vanishing power. You can turn it into a Cassiopeia if you want it to stick around longer. There's a bunch of different things you can do with it. The fact that, again, this sort of plays even further into this idea that Cosmos is kind of a toolbox where you can have a bunch of different effects. You kind of need to figure out what you need at any given time. Carnival plays into that by being any Signi that you need it to be, as long as there's a copy of it on the board. And again, if there's something your opponent has that doesn't have Shadow that you really like, man, that's a really cool Signi, I would love to have that. You can just turn that into Carnival into that as well, which is another potential flex option as well. So this is a card that I don't know if I would... It's hard to commit 4 slots to something like this just because it requires other Signi on the field, especially if you need very specific effects. But I can definitely see this as being, a splash 2 of, maybe 3 of even, if you're feeling a little adventurous. A lot of flexibility with this card as well. The fact that it's 10k is mostly irrelevant because pretty much anytime you play it, you're going to play it with the intent of having it become something else. So it's a really cool card. It plays perfectly into what Carnival does in the anime if you watch the anime. If you've not watched the anime, I would highly recommend it, especially the first season, which unfortunately Carnival is not in. Anyway, it plays well with the character itself. It's a really cool ability. It kind of fits in with what Cosmos is trying to do anyway. So definitely a good card to keep an eye out for in the future. And finally, I know we have not talked about Elrigs basically at all, other than kind of in passing here, but I do want to shout out these two in particular for what they do with the Cosmos archetype. The nice part about Cosmos is you can basically fit it in with whatever, as long as the colors match. Again, I would always have a black and white, and then if you want to do blue or red, it's up to you. But you can kind of build around whatever you want. I mean, Deus Center is obviously one that kind of sticks out because the Deus Center is so generically strong. But if there's certain Elrigs you want to use because you're a fan of them or whatever, you kind of have the freedom to do whatever you want. But I do want to mention again these two in particular just because of how they interact with the deck. Machina Wing Slash, which if you're playing Machina assists, you probably are familiar with how strong they all are just generically. I mean, Machina is an incredible assist Elrig. Obviously the vanishing effect is great. The other effect, to add a target level 1 Signi without a guard from your trash to your hand. In Cosmos in particular, this is the whole deck, including the spells. So if you're in a situation, the Moonbites, if you're in a situation where you just sometimes you're playing and you can't find the level ones, or the level ones you need are just on the board because you can't get rid of them. You may play Wing Slash for a little bit less than value, so to speak. But in Cosmos, this has just way more targets, or it's a situation where you're using a level 2, for enter purposes, and you spend that enter, and now it's in the trash. Now you can just recur it to your hand and just have that for the future. A lot of options with this. The fact that, again, all the cards in your trash are level 1s. Wing Slash can pick whichever one you want and bring it back to your hand. So some really good options with that as well. For the center options, if you are feeling a little bit cheeky, you can play MC Lion Third Verse Alt, which has a once per turn effect that whenever it attacks, you shuffle your deck and reveal the top card. If it's a level 1 Signy, you draw it. If it's a Servant, you crush a Life Cloth. Now, obviously, the Servant is extremely situational, and it's basically a huge win if you hit it, but it's not something you can really count on. The relevant part of the text is that you shuffle the deck, you flip it. If it's a level 1, it goes to your hand, which, again, because of Paradise Universe, all the cards in the deck are level 1 Signies. So this will always draw you a card at the end of your turn. The fact that it's at the end of your turn is a little inconvenient. It's potentially susceptible to disruption and that sort of thing. It gives it to you at possibly the worst possible time, because if you need it to fill the lanes, obviously it's a little too late at that point. But it does kind of set you up for your next turn as well. So it's just another option. Again, so many things in Cosmos. Add cards to your hand. That it just goes along with it as well. There is so much kind of hand advantage in Cosmos that I don't know how relevant this ability is in terms of is it better to just play Lion as an assist, because Lion has some extremely powerful assists as well. That's kind of your call, but I figured I'd mention it. I use it currently. I don't know how long I'm going to be using it in my Cosmos build, but it's something that it's fun. MC Lion's kind of a popular character anyway, so if you're like, man, I love Lion, but I want to play Cosmos, then, you've got the perfect one right here, because she just draws you a card every time she attacks. So anyway, I just figured I'd mention that as an option as well. And that is Cosmos in a nutshell. So this is obviously a very different format than my other videos. We're not restricted by LRIG colors or even LRIG specific characters in this one, so you're kind of free to build whatever you want based on the colors or even the characters or the Signy that you want. And Cosmos actually has a lot of options. It's one of the more supported types. I would say it's the most supported type, but it's up there. I would say probably top 3, maybe top 5. So there's a lot of different ways you can go with it, and you kind of let yourself build however you want. If there's certain characters you like, you can use those as well. I will say that in my own personal playing of the deck, that the main thing that Cosmos tends to struggle with, at least right now, is really end game punching power. Even though it removes a lot of Signy, it clears a lot of lanes, and it really does put a lot of pressure on your opponent. The fact that it doesn't really have a good secondary piece at the moment kind of hampers it. And I'm very excited to see once Welcome Back Diva comes out and we actually have dedicated Dream Team pieces. And again, you can use whichever one you want. I'm thinking about leaning the red one, just because it has, again, that extra punching power in it to put extra pressure on your opponent. I think once those come out, the deck's going to become a lot stronger automatically. I think the Hanayo assist is also going to be really good for the deck. I'm using X right now, which is pretty good. X Echo is pretty good to fill the trash again. And X Echo combos kind of with Machina Wing Slash, that you discard to X and then you bring it back with Machina. Not that you always need that kind of thing, but I'm excited to see what the future holds. I think the Signy base, for the most part, is pretty well defined. Again, there's things coming out, like Sash is coming out in P06, Carnival's coming out in P07. Those are going to be big ones, but a lot of the core of the deck is already here, and you can already feel free to use it. Alphard and Cercinus feel great to play because they're always getting you cards. Eclipse is awesome for a removal option. So a lot of really cool things that the deck does. So feel free to try it. Let me know if you have questions, concerns, comments. If this is the type of video that you'd like to see in the future, I may revisit this for some of the other archetypes. Cosmos is just one that, for me personally, I've been loving it, just because there's so many card options. Like I said, it's very toolboxy, so it doesn't feel samey really at all. You're kind of looking for your Eclipses, obviously, to remove, and your Dracos and that kind of thing, but you do have the option to go more defensive if you need it for certain attack phases, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of cool things with the deck, and thanks for sticking around and watching, and we'll see you in the next one.